So good news, 3 Israeli hostages were returned home alive yesterday, but bad news, Hamas took to the street almost immediately and started chanting slogans calling for violence against Jews. Here's a clip of that. So what they're saying can roughly be translated to Haybar, O Jews, the army of Muhammad will return. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, they say this chant can be perceived as a threat of armed violence or forcible expulsion against Jews today. Super. That's where we are on day 1 of the ceasefire. So yes, definitely some good news yesterday, but forgive me if I'm a little bit skeptical that any real end to this conflict is in sight. It just feels, to me at least, like the core issues are yet to be resolved. So this ceasefire still feels very, very temporary. But hopefully I'm proven wrong. Would love to be proven wrong on in that regard. Now, turning to the 3 female Israeli hostages that were returned, they're on the screen here. Forgive me for my pronunciation. Romy Gonen, Doran Steinbrecher, and Emily Damari. Those 3 girls spent 471 days in Hamas captivity, and just yesterday were reunited with their families. So the way that this handoff really took place is Red Cross vehicles crossed from Israeli territory into the Gaza Strip. They traveled along the Netzarim corridor, which is this area of Gaza here, right through the middle of the Strip. Eventually, they turned north into portions of Gaza City. And we do have, based off of geolocated on Twitter or X, they were able to identify the location this handoff took place. And we actually have a lot of footage from the handoff, albeit all of that footage mostly is coming from Hamas directly, and then a lot of it coming from Palestinian civilians in the area. I'm going to play some of that here to give you an idea of, the handoff went smoothly, I guess. The girls made it into the vehicles and made their way home, but it looks like total chaos. And it does look like, we'll get more information on this later, but it looks like the Hamas sources are saying that they were given to-go bags or something. I'm not even sure the right way to say, gift bags maybe, like a map of Gaza, a certificate, which what? I wonder if that was messed up in translation. And then it does look like some of them had pendants with the Palestinian flag. So I don't know if we'll get more information about that as those girls are kind of reintegrated into Israeli society. But that's the stuff coming out on Hamas channels. Now, I just want to take a second to look at the perspective from the Israeli families waiting for news as to whether or not their loved ones are actually going to be coming home. There's around 100 hostages that still remain in the Gaza Strip. It's unknown how many of those are alive or dead. So just think about that for a second. If you've got loved ones that are missing and you have no idea if they're still alive, then news comes out that some are going to be returned home, within the next 24 to 48 hours kind of thing, as this deal came together. And then the names come out. So these 3 girls' names, Romy, Doran, and Emily, their names come out, and their families had to have been so relieved, right? What great news for them. They've been holding out for so long. Not only are these girls alive, they're on their way home. But think about the other hostage families that didn't get that news. They have to sit there and wonder, is my loved one not on that list because they're not alive? Or are they not on that list just because they didn't make the list this time around? And they have to continue to wait. Right now, they're going to wait another 7 days until the next group of, I think it's 4 hostages are going to be released. Think of the mental toll that would take on anybody, you, me, anybody, if that happened just once or twice. And some of these families are having to go through this for now well over a year. Now, for us out here in the general public, it doesn't seem like there's really been any Hamas proof of life of these hostages from the very beginning. Very, very few instances where they actually show evidence that any specific hostage is still alive. Maybe there's more communication behind the scenes between the Israeli government, Hamas, and some of these families, but by and large, it does look like the majority of these families have no idea about the fate of their loved ones. So just want to take a second to try to understand. We never can without being in their shoes, but try to understand the mental toll that this is taking on so many inside of Israel right now. Now, in exchange for these 90 Palestinian prisoners were released by Israel into the West Bank, and that's actually important, the location. We're going to come back to that here in a minute. They're going into the West Bank. They are not going into Gaza, and we do have some footage showing the release of these prisoners. into the West Bank. And for anybody just kind of tuning in for the first time or maybe not super tied into the conflict, you're going to hear some arguments over the terminology being used there. I'm saying Israeli hostages. Those 3 girls were hostages of Hamas, and these are Palestinian prisoners of Israel. And the terminology there is, I think, important. And the reason for that is these 3 girls genuinely were hostages. Like, they meet that criteria. They were just out there living their lives in Israel, and they were taken against their will. They were not charged with anything. There was not even like a sham trial at all. They were just purely held because they were Israeli and used as bargaining chips. On the other side of this, and there is some room for debate on this, so I don't want to pretend like this is perfectly clear cut. We have Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. Some of these are murderers. They have been accused and found guilty of killing Israelis. They have Israeli blood on their hands, no doubt. Others are in jail for like throwing rocks at times at Israeli soldiers, and some probably just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So there's a wide range. And I should say there have been accusations over the years that Israel is pretty free and loose with rounding up Palestinians, and maybe they're serving more time than you or I here in the United States would expect them to be. So it's a lot there, right? But I do think there's a key difference between hostage and prisoner in this instance. But by and large, throughout these exchanges, you're going to see quite a few more. Like in this case, 3 hostages in exchange for 90 Palestinian prisoners. That's the general ratio you're going to see as this ceasefire continues. Now let's jump back into the scenes that were transpiring yesterday in Gaza. The amount of footage yesterday was wild. And Trey Yinks over at Fox News said that some of this was just playing on repeat across a handful of Israeli media channels. And I can understand why. I mean, you blink and all of a sudden these Hamas militants with their headbands and clean kit and uniforms and their flags are out walking through the streets of Gaza, chanting victory, celebrating what they say is a victory over Israel. And I kind of, I don't know how this is going to be perceived in Israel. Is it salt on the wound for the IDF members that were lost during the course of this war to see this many Hamas militants walking around freely? Or is it kind of stealing the resolve of some to say, hey, the job's not done. This is not resolved. We have to find a way to get in there and actually eliminate the threat that is Hamas. I think the basic takeaway, for me at least, in looking at all this different footage, is this situation in Gaza is clearly not resolved. So there's a couple things that I want to draw your attention to here. The first one is the number of kids celebrating with the Hamas fighters. They're being cheered on. They're taking selfies with them at time. So this is an entirely new generation that now has a reason to fight Israel. Now, you might disagree with that reason, but this isn't even something unique to Gaza or Palestinians versus Israelis, anything like that. This is just general human nature. These kids, whatever age bracket you want to put them in, young adults to a degree, they have just watched their neighborhoods, their homes be destroyed. They've seen countless family members and loved ones killed. They have a reason to fight. Again, you might not agree with the reason to fight, but they have one. Now, what we will never know is what percentage of those in that category saw the destruction and saw the death and said, not making that mistake again, and are going to try to pursue some sort of peaceful solution rather than entering into another conflict. But we have to, if you just look at how Hamas is being treated in these videos, there's clearly still a lot of support from the population towards the Hamas fighters and the organization that is Hamas. You can't look past that. That is significant. In fact, there were some, when you look at kind of the crowds that were coming around here, there was a little pushback that Hamas was actually manipulating some of these to make it seem like they had more support within the local population than they actually did. Here's a overhead picture of some of the crowds, and this was being circulated to say like, hey, look, Hamas doesn't have as much support as they want. They just kind of crowded into that one location. I don't know. I feel like you're kind of splitting hairs at that point. There's still, how many people do you need to see on the streets at the beginning of a ceasefire to say that they have the support of at least some local civilians? I don't know what the number is there. Like, I would have been shocked if there were tens of thousands of people pouring into the streets. This seems like a pretty significant number. I don't know. But anyways, that is something circulating right now, kind of the pushback of Hamas doesn't have the support they say. Here's why. I'm not so sure I buy that. Now, yesterday, U.S. President Biden was giving a speech, and at the end of it, a reporter yelled a question kind of as he's leaving the stage. Are there any concerns about Hamas regrouping? And President Biden said no, which, on the one hand, seems pretty detached from reality. Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing in these videos? Like, there they are. That's Hamas right there. They are running portions of the Gaza Strip. They are in charge. Like, there's portions of Gaza where the Israeli military still has control, especially around the outskirts. Everything else, it's Hamas. Like, there has not been any other organization that has stepped up since this war began in any meaningful way to take over that position from Hamas. They are still the governing entity. They are the de facto governing entity in large portions of Gaza right now. So, any concerns about Hamas regrouping? No. I don't know if he's looking at the same footage you and I are, but that does seem a little off track. The other side of that is maybe he personally doesn't have any concerns because he's leaving office later today. So maybe in this case, the better place to look is at the incoming Trump administration. And Representative Mike Waltz, who's coming in as Trump's national security advisor, gave an interview yesterday where he said, quote, "If Hamas backs out, moves the goalposts, we will support Israel in doing what it has to do, number one. And number two, Hamas will never govern Gaza." But again, and look, the Trump administration right now is very pro-Israel, like across the board, so that's not all that shocking. But look at these videos and pictures coming out of Gaza right now. Hamas is governing Gaza, right? Arguably with less military capacity, but there's no other organization. So then what? What's the answer? Because from everything we can tell, like, is Israel going to invade Gaza? Like, what's the move to pull Hamas out of power going forward? I mean, does this look like to you an organization that's getting ready to come to the negotiating table and say, that was great, let's lay down our arms and we'll transition power over to some, maybe Palestinian Authority or something like that? There's no indications at this point. In fact, across the axis of resistance, be it the Houthis, Hezbollah, militias in Iraq and Syria, the IRGC, they are all praising Hamas right now. So again, it kind of looks like the stage is being set for Hamas to stay in power. I don't know what it would take to fully remove them at this point. There has to be a viable alternative, and that really hasn't presented itself to date. Now, I want to go back to the map here real quick to dial in on the West Bank, just to give people an idea of the two different areas we're talking about. So the majority of, the hostage exchange was down in Gaza, kind of the southwest portion of Israel. Moving up a little further northeast, we're into the West Bank. And this is notable because this is where the Palestinian prisoners were just released into. And yesterday, in kind of celebration of this ceasefire, Hamas spokesperson Abu Obaida said, quote, "All respect and appreciation to the heroes of the dear West Bank who are fighting despite the attempts at liquidation, and we call on them to escalate the confrontation with the occupation." So Hamas calling on their followers and other jihadi groups in the West Bank to take up arms and fight Israel. So again, my skepticism of, God, this doesn't feel like it's anywhere near being over. There's been, for some reason, a lot of pushback online that Hamas exists in the West Bank. They have elements there. They've regularly celebrated the martyrdom of their fighters in the West Bank when Israeli forces have killed them. Israel is regularly carrying out counterterrorism raids. Just a couple days ago, carried out airstrikes in the West Bank. It is not entirely peaceful, not by a long shot. In fact, in the last couple days, we've seen Israel kind of publicly show and announce that they're moving additional forces into the West Bank, kind of in anticipation of what could be an uptick in violence. And you can understand it from Hamas's perspective, right? Again, not all 90 of the prisoners that were just released are going to immediately run to the nearest Hamas office and sign up and pick up an AK and figure out how they can go about attacking Israeli forces, but some probably will to a degree, right? Whether that was their background or whether they became radicalized by being held in an Israeli prison, who knows? From Hamas's perspective, they're probably looking at this thinking that their numbers in the West Bank are about to get a pretty significant bump. So not, all that unusual that the Hamas spokesperson looks at the West Bank and says, hey guys, your turn. Start fighting back against Israel. Now, it's worth mentioning real quick before getting into what comes next, the terms of this ceasefire agreement. So to kind of, what can we expect in the coming weeks and months? Right now, we're in phase one. Phase one is designed to be 6 weeks long. 33 hostages are set to be exchanged for a number of Palestinian prisoners. Additionally, the IDF will leave populated areas and humanitarian aid will increase. Of note, this map here was released across Gaza by the IDF, showing the areas roughly that Israeli forces are going to continue operating in. So Israel is going to maintain kind of a border around Gaza. Whereas all those areas, and it's the area in red, all of the other areas, kind of in the populated areas of Gaza, is where the IDF is set to leave from. So again, when you're talking about what areas does the IDF control versus another group, and that other group is Hamas, there's a map showing it right there. We did see just yesterday quite a bit of humanitarian aid flowing into the Gaza Strip. Some videos showing that. Here, real quick, by the way, check out this picture. Hamas was guarding the shipments as they went into Gaza. Check out this dude, ski mask and all. That's a unique setup. Haven't really seen a lot at this point, but thought that one was worth highlighting. Anyways, plenty of kit, I guess, still left over for the Hamas fighters. So in phase one, there's supposed to be 3 female hostages returned on day 1. That did happen. 4 hostages will be released on day 7, so this coming Sunday, and the remaining 26 over the next 5 weeks. Phase 2 is working towards a permanent ceasefire where all remaining hostages will be released for more Palestinian prisoners, and the IDF leaves Gaza entirely. Again, we talked about this in a previous video. There's no mention in here about Hamas not remaining in power at this point. You're seeing some talk about that on the outside, but it hasn't been codified into any agreement from what I've seen. And then phase 3, the remains of deceased hostages are returned in exchange for deceased prisoners, and the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip begins. It'd be great to get to that point. Again, a little skeptical that they were going to make it all the way there based off how things are playing out right now. So in looking at what comes next, a couple things to keep an eye on here. First off, there are elements within both sides here, so within the Israeli government and within, I'll say, the broader axis of resistance that want this war to continue for any number of reasons. So be very careful. You're going to see a lot of accusations about violations of the ceasefire, trying to pin it on the other side. And the way this will go is one side will pin a violation on the other side, and they say, well, that gives us justification to get back in and get back after it or something, right? Expect that from, there's certain elements that are going to want that to happen, so just be cautious when you see it. Also, self-defense strikes are still a thing. A ceasefire does not prevent, let's say in this case, if Israel is watching the Gaza Strip and they see Hamas setting up rockets to launch them into Israeli territory, Israel's going to carry out a preemptive strike, killing those militants and destroying that rocket launch location. People will then say, oh my God, this is a violation of the ceasefire. Self-defense. Self-defense strikes can occur and would not be a violation of this agreement. But overall, the big thing here is we're kind of just waiting on pins and needles. So we wait to see how far both sides can get into this agreement without any significant violations on one side or the other, in the hopes that at some point in phase 2, maybe phase 3, there is some sort of long-term solution for peace. I know a lot of this video is my being skeptical that we'll actually get there. I am hopeful that we will. It's just, at this point, it's a long ways to go. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.